Welcome everybody to a new episode of the Blue Dragon podcast. In this episode, episode 9 of season 2, I'm interviewing Debra Baker. And Debra Baker is the author of this wonderful book, A CISO Guide to Cyber Resilience from Pact. I asked her many questions on the upcoming role of a CISO, the challenges, the technology, what to look for, and I absolutely loved it. I wish you a wonderful time in this episode. So welcome everybody at this new episode of the Blue Dragon podcast. And today we have as a guest Debra Baker. And Debra Baker is a cybersecurity expert with over 30 years of experience. She began her career in the US Air Force. She worked at IBM, at Cisco, and many other organizations. She has her own company called Trusted CISO, and she specializes in strategic cybersecurity, risk management, and compliance. And she helps her clients navigate these complex frameworks like NIST, SOC 2, ISO 27001, FedRAMP, and many others. She is a CISSP and CCSP holder, and she even has some provisional patents on some AI-driven vendor assessment tools. We'll talk more about that in a moment. And she's recognized as one of the top 100 women in cybersecurity. She currently lives in the US and has over 8,000 LinkedIn followers. And she is the author of this wonderful book, A CISO Guide to Cyber Resilience by Pact, and it came out last year in 2024. Debra, welcome.
Thank you so much. That was such an awesome introduction. So I'm so glad to be here today.
Thank you for being here. It's great to have you. We're going to talk today about the CISO and the CISO role and the evolutions in the field. But here in Europe, with all the new legislation, it's all about cyber resilience. It's the magic words these days. So in your experience, what is cyber resilience and why is it becoming so important?
Basically, it's, setting up your defenses and being prepared for an attack and where you might actually, even if you've done everything right, that one employee, clicks on that one phishing email, or, some change was made and some port was opened. And so even if you've done everything right, something bad could still happen. So you've always got to be prepared. So cyber resilience is, not if you're going to be attacked, when, and how quickly you can get back to business, basically. So that's what it's all about.
Great. And why is it becoming more and more important over the years? We're seeing it in legislation in Europe. If you say 10 years ago, it was all about cybersecurity and less the resilience part. In the last years, it's all about this resilience. Why is it so important?
I've seen it in the US. It's I saw it, several years ago. It was more important, and you saw it used more. And then it I thought it sort of tailed off a little bit. But for my book, I definitely wanted to zero in on it because it's a great concept and it's reality, essentially. Because it's, even if you have all the best defenses and everything, something can still go wrong. So you have to plan for that, basically. So. Exactly.
When I talk to my clients, they always think about cybersecurity and they say, but Jetro, what is this resilience? Why is it so important? I say, it's like you get punched in the face, you get knocked down. How fast can you get back on your feet to continue the operations?
Exactly. Yeah.
And I like that mindset. So let's see, from your 30 plus years of experience, what are some principles of cyber resilience that remains true over those years, independent of technological shifts?
I would say, there's, basics or essentials, having good backups, testing your backups, making sure you have offline backups. One of the big things is if there's a ransomware attack, I saw a leader at CISO say that every single, where they've come in to try to help with a ransomware attack, the backups were also encrypted. So it's just, those fundamentals, basically getting them right, and having your email protections, having your antivirus, which is now EDR, but your advanced endpoint protection. And way back when I started, it was you have a firewall. It sounds funny, but that's how it was, and we're safe. When we were at IBM, it was because it was in the 90s, but it's evolved. But the other thing is, even though it's evolved, like zero trust. And I talk about this in my book. If you look at the fundamentals, it goes back to a certificate on every device. Every person has a certificate assigned to them. And we were actually doing that in the 90s. And when I worked for Interest Technologies, and their software was, you would have a PKI at your company, you would issue a certificate to all of your employees, to your devices. Everything would have to authenticate to each other, mutual authenticate. And if you look at zero trust, that's basically at the heart of it. That's what it is. Everything has to authenticate. But at the time, they said, well, this is too much for a company to have to do. It's too expensive. I mean, the companies that did it, have really got a good solid foundation. But they basically, Gartner just said, this is too complex, too expensive, and we just walked away. But I was when I was doing the research for my book, and I look back at it, and I'm like, we were doing this, but now it's zero trust. Now it's got a cool name.
Exactly. Okay,
so,
nice.
Yeah.
So some principles from the 90s still ring true today, like make sure your backups are, let's say, offline and protected from potential integration attacks. Having these certificates that you can identify persons and devices clear. Like you moved in your career through many different environments, U.S. Air Force, IBM, Cisco, etc. Have you found that your philosophy on cybersecurity, cyber resilience has changed moving through those environments?
I think because I got into the security space early, which was 1998 when I went from IBM to Interest Technologies, and I was doing the build out of the PKIs, the back end PKI. So I was already hearing those, like multi-factor authentication and a lot of the principles that still stand today. And so I think I was ahead of the game, but then everybody kind of caught up because with all of the attacks and everything, happening. Now it's, multi-factor authentication. I think that is like one of the most important things, that and the offline backups that you can do to protect your organization. And we'll see again and again that just having that multi-factor, or, now they're moving to passkeys, but it still falls under that multi-factor authentication, is one of the best things that you could do at your company. And then seeing, and making sure then that it's like throughout. Like, are we actually using it on this server? Are we using it in this SaaS service? So.
Nice. Yeah, like when I read your book, which by the way, for the audience, I highly recommend the book because it starts with a fictional company that gets attacked. And you describe it in such a way that as a reader, you go through it yourself, the attack on a big company. Can you explain, like, from your experience, like one of these must have happened to you and you got your mustard from there for that story. Can you share more about it? Like, how does it feel as a CISO to get attacked, and what goes through your mind at that moment?
Yeah, if you're going through an attack, of course it's very scary, unsettling. The biggest thing is just to stay calm. And at that point, of course, you want to have, an incident response plan that you've tested, at least, at the very least, you've tested your backups, that you've thought about your disaster recovery, and that you've, done a tabletop, for example, at least annually, so that, you can remain calm and kind of think through it. Because a lot of times something may happen, like with a third party vendor that you have, and you hear, like, it shows up on Twitter, for example, and the company is actually, so the hacker's on there, saying, I hacked so-and-so, whatever company, and you use that product, and then you're waiting, you don't actually hear, though, from that company for several days maybe, and then, they make an announcement and they say, well, we're only going to reach out to the customers that were actually affected. And so you're trying to think through, what I did was, and when I was in situations similar to that, we set up like a little team, and we just kind of like brainstorm through it, like, what can we do with the least disruption, but to make sure that if we were, part of this, basically, to protect ourselves. And so, I would just say remain calm is like the biggest thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like in your example in the book, in the story, that the CISO immediately, brings the team together, and it's like direct communication. Like, you're not alone, you bring the team together. But right. I can imagine for for smaller organizations with less perhaps budget and capacity, that the CISO is basically alone or with one other person. What kind of advice would you give to a really small team and they feel the pressure from C-level, even if it's just an organization of 250 people, there's like 2 people for this? What kind of advice can you give that type of CISO?
Right. I would say, definitely, key IT person, with you, DevOps, some sort of like lead that understands, the development environment in case, that's going to be affected. And yeah, setting up those calls, cross communication, and think of, like when I do tabletops with clients, I'll talk to them. I'll say, look, especially with smaller companies, I'm like, you don't need to purchase a retainer because they have these retainers like the red team companies. And for a small company to have to spend $10,000 that they may not, I mean, it makes sense like for a large enterprise that they may not use. But what I said is you need to research red team type pen test companies that's what their main job is. If it gets to that point and you don't have the expertise in house and you need to bring somebody else in and take a look and figure out, did we actually get them out? Are we clear? Are we, okay now? And because that's one of the biggest things is to find out, when they actually got into your network, how much damage is done, did you lose any data, things like that. So already have that company in mind so you can quickly give them a call and get help. So
Exactly. Yeah, that's very good. That's very interesting. Yes, get your shortlist ready of external partners who can help you out when the crisis hits. Yeah. Clear, nice. Now, what I always, or not always, but often see in organizations is an overabundant trust in certifications. Like we're ISO 27001 certified, and then 3 months later they get hacked or there's a breach. And then C-level says, well, wait a minute, we just got the ISO 27001 certification and we passed the audit. So how is it possible we got hacked? What would your response be to such a mindset of C-level?
Yeah, I mean, of course, compliance is important and it does build a framework, like a baseline security. One of the things that I try to do when I'm working with my clients is actually make sure we are building in the best practices for cybersecurity and, securing and lowering a risk while we're actually doing the compliance. So it is more than just that checkbox. And so, because there are some things, for example, that a lot of the standards will still accept 8-character passwords. But now we know, especially even with ChatGPT, like a year or two ago, people were using it to crack passwords. And they may, I haven't like tried to do this, but there's this one company that every year they have a listing of, how fast that they, cracked passwords basically. And then they added ChatGPT and it really just moved up the timeline. And so even if they put guardrails on ChatGPT now, there's still, like these dark GPTs and things that are out there that hackers are using. So that's one thing so you could meet it. I get if you have really old equipment and that's all you can put as an 8-character, I understand. And I think that's why NIST still has 8 characters. You'll see it from time to time in different standards. But, you need to be at like 12 or 14, characters and more than just characters, the password complexity. That's another thing that NIST had come out and said that you don't need to have a complex password. Well, if you do, it will actually make it stronger and harder to hack. The downside is it's easier to forget. And so what they found is people would get a new one and then they'd use like a really weak one. You can use like a long passphrase. So like a sentence, and with spaces, for example, and that's much better. But it's still just the way we used to do it, like the password complexity, using a password manager, which is new, relatively new, but that's really the best way to protect or go to the passkeys. So
Yes, exactly. And what I see is an organization can have a huge list of backlog items all through the ISMS, but if they do not tackle those issues and put them into reality, you remain at risk. So even being ISO 27001 certified, but you're not following up on those actions, leaves you vulnerable. Which actually brings us to SOC 2. What is this type of certification and how does it differ from ISO 27001?
Yeah, so SOC 2 is really popular in the US, but it's also getting more popular in Europe and around the world. It's ISO actually says that SOC 2 and ISO 27001 are 96% the same. And I've done like many SOC 2s, and I just recently went through the ISO 27001 with one of my customers. And the ISO 27001, it's basically everything that SOC 2 has, and then more. And I noticed the auditors are more rigorous, and there's more documentation. With the SOC 2, it's much more customized, and I think that's why, especially startups, they love SOC 2. And I mean, it's they get told you need SOC 2, you need ISO 27001, and I'm always like, get SOC 2 first. And the SOC 2 is very customizable, where it could be like if you actually did everything in SOC 2, let's say it might be, I don't know, let's say it's like 280 controls or something like that. But you can do a subset. You can do like 80 or 90 controls. And that's usually how I will scope it. And you don't have to do, there's like 5 different areas, like the common criteria is what they call it. So you don't have to do necessarily like privacy or processing integrity. Depends on your company, what your company does, type of data that they're actually, managing, processing, things like that. So ISO's not like that. ISO's like, this is the requirement. I mean, you have to have like a really good reason if you're not going to have one of those controls that's already in there. They don't just let you customize it. I mean, you can customize for SOC 2 right up if you're meeting a control, let's say you're meeting it like 80%, but there's just something there's one part of it you're missing. They'll let you actually customize that control. Even like during the audit, they'll say, okay, well, let's just rephrase it. Like they don't give you that sort of freedom on the ISO 27001. So it's great because it is customizable, but at the same time, you do need to take a look at the SOC 2 report, because I hear there's some funny stuff going on sometimes where they're just trying to get the SOC 2 report and maybe they have like 10 controls or something really kind of ridiculous, just to say, yeah, I've got the SOC 2. So that's why they say, look at the report, make sure, what the controls are.
Yeah, so what I understand from SOC 2, and I'm not certified yet, is that it really looks into the actual implementation. While ISO has a great ISMS and a nice backlog, which is risk assessed, SOC 2 looks at the real actual implementation. Now, for an average sized organization, what would you recommend? Go for SOC 2 first or ISO 27001, or are there specific conditions? What's your advice?
I would say go for SOC 2 first, and get those processes, get the policies, and the ISO is just going to build on top of what you've just done. And when you're in Europe, you pretty much need to get ISO. But I know like in the US, I would say it's based on what your customers are asking for. If you have a customer, especially somebody in Europe, that says they want you to have ISO on top of the SOC 2, then get it also. But yeah, I would just say go ahead and start with the SOC 2. And like you said, get in the processes. And of course, now there's like all these great GRC tools you can hook up to it really works great if you have a cloud environment. And because a lot of the controls, they can just hook right into your cloud and it will report, do you have this auditing set, is this data encrypted? And so it's a win-win because you're actually, continuously monitoring and getting that control implemented. And when it goes green, it's just like, it's there. It's not like you have to go and like prove anything on top of it or whatever and upload, manual evidence or anything like that. So.
Yeah, that's actually a great answer there. Like the GRC tooling is getting so good these days. It's a shame not to use them. Wonderful. Hi there, I'm Jetro, your host, and I love bringing you fresh insights on cybersecurity, cloud technology, governance, and auditing. Cyber threats are evolving fast. Protecting your business, Ensuring compliance and maintaining trust with your stakeholders isn't just important, it is essential. Ignoring cybersecurity, that's a risk you don't want to take. No matter your industry or company size, protecting sensitive data and ensuring operational resilience should be a priority. Regulations like NIS2 and DORA are already shaping the way businesses handle security, making compliance non-negotiable. At SecWise, we help businesses like yours stay secure and compliant. Here's what we offer: security roadmaps, practical steps tailored to your operations, Azure, M365, or even your hybrid workplace. Compliance readiness: meet ISO 27001, NIS2 and DORA requirements with confidence. SOC implementation, real-time threat detection and response 24/7. Cloud and AI security, advanced protection against evolving threats, and end-to-end support, from risk analysis to remediation and continuous access to our specialists. Since you're listening to the Blue Dragon podcast, as a thank you, you will get 3% off your next purchase within the SecWise portfolio. Whether it's a full NIS2 assessment or managed security services, 3% off your next purchase can save you hundreds of euros. Visit secwise.eu/Blue Dragon podcast to get started. Make cybersecurity your strength. Get started today. Visit secwise.eu/Blue Dragon podcast. Now, imagine you arrive as a CISO into an average sized organization and you have the ability to pick and assemble your own team. In your opinion, what would be a great team to start with? For example, would you have a IT network architect, or would you like a GRC specialist next to you? How would you build up your own team?
I would definitely want, technical person. The bigger the organization, probably having a risk person too. I would say, probably 2 technical people helping you and a really good close relationship with IT.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, the CISO is now an official position, especially in government roles. And what you typically see, and we'll talk more about that, is the fractional CISO or the vCISO, where you're there 2 days a week. And then you need somebody in your team who's working there 5 days a week to carry on and actually perform the implementation. And so with that context, can you explain, because you're a vCISO as well, to the audience, what is a vCISO and why should organizations have one?
Yeah, so the vCISO, virtual CISO, they also call it fractional CISO. And essentially, it's for organizations that, once you go public or once you get to a certain size, you're going to have an internal CISO. And so the vCISO, I usually work with small to mid-sized companies. They're not, IPO, they're not, to that level yet. A lot of times they don't have a security team. And so I end up working directly with their IT, their CFO, CEO sometimes, depending on how small the company is. So I'm kind of like the extension of being the security team, but also giving them their cybersecurity strategy, leading them through, doing the gap analysis, for SOC 2 or ISO 27001, and actually putting the controls into place so that they meet the compliance, and then hand holding them through the audit when the auditors come in. So
that's nice. So you provide the strategy and the framework and the big steps, and then but who does then, let's say, the day-to-day operations, the day-to-day risk analysis, etc.?
So usually, almost always, unless I'm doing CMMC, I almost always say, get a GRC tool, because it's so helpful with SOC 2, ISO 27001. So then that's something I can come in and look at, once or twice a week and check and make sure the controls are, still green. And then I'll work directly with the CTO, the lead developer, and what you end up doing is training them so that they're thinking about, okay, we're bringing in a new, they'll be like, what do I need to do for SOC 2 when we bring in a new vendor? Well, at the very least, ask them, do they have SOC 2? Do they have ISO? That's the baseline, right? Okay, you do. Okay, send me this report. Okay, they don't. Okay, send them this questionnaire. And just when I realized that my client, internally, they're talking about some sort of cyber hack or something that happened recently. That's what you want, is to start building that culture within the company, so that they're starting to think about security, even though they aren't cybersecurity people. So that's what you really want.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. What I'm seeing as a fractional CISO or a vCISO, so it's just meaning you have a fraction of your time dedicated to a customer. So for me, I can do up to 4, and then my brain starts to melt because you need to keep track of all the things. Like, do you have any tips or tricks, advice for other fractional CISO, like how to keep track of all your customers and their progress, and how much can you handle at the same time?
Yeah, I that can be, yeah, it can be a little tricky. So every time I end up with, at one point I think I had like 6 or 7 or something, and I was like, what? I just kept like stacking it up. I'm like, okay, if you here, if you there, it's kind of like, okay, today, what am I going to work on? What's the most
Well, there are
pressing?
six work days in a week, so you can do it.
Yeah, yeah. So, anyway, and I recently hired my first employee, which I'm really excited about. So I'm training her.
Congratulations.
But yeah, I mean, honestly, it is. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm for that. I'm kind of at the spreadsheet level. I'm like, okay, here are my customers. Here's where they're at. Almost all of them have a GRC tool, which helps. So you can, so it's tracking. It's, what evidence needs to be updated, those sort of things.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, it definitely can get a little crazy, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, and here in Europe, we have a new legislation across all EU member states, which is called NIS, or the Network and Information Security Directive, number 2, version 2. And so many organizations need to comply with it. And one of the big new pieces compared to ISO 27001, like heavily focused on, is supply chain security. So now you have to screen the vendors, especially the critical vendors. Like if they go down or they are compromised, the impact will hit us, and we get severely impacted. What are some, and I can imagine some IT leaders now listening, like, wait, vendors? I have 200 vendors or even more. What type of advice can you give, like how to screen and how to deal with supply chain security?
Yeah. When I first time I was a CISO at a Silicon Valley startup, I said, I want a list of all the vendors. Oh, yeah. Even if we're kind of, I mean, we probably had less than 100 people. It was like, oh, okay, yeah, no. It was crazy. So then it's more about, okay, the critical vendors that directly affect, like, so if we have a cloud product, what are the ones we're directly relying on? Of course, like AWS, or it'd be Microsoft if you're in Azure, and just breaking it down that way. Okay, or we're using, whatever's, Cloudflare, or so looking at, whatever your product is, and then, okay, what are the key vendors that I'm relying on? And then, what are the ones that have direct access? So, and if that went down, would it actually, take my product down? What sort, so that's kind of a better way to think about it. And what the auditors really care about are, the critical vendors, which is the ones that we're talking about. That's really directly linked, and if something happened with it, could have an effect. So that's a better way, because yeah, I learned that the hard way. It's, there's like so many potential vendors that you would have that you wouldn't be able to keep up with
Hmm.
it, basically. So
Yeah, that makes sense. And tooling can help there as well with the automated questionnaires and these things, but still you have to put them into the tool, right, to do all of that. So
right, right. Yeah.
exactly. Now, the other thing that I see is on the rise is OT security, operational technology. If you're in the utilities sector, all these smart sensors, they're somehow connected to the network, etc. How do you see, especially in the US, how do you see the rise of OT security, and what should a CISO do different or specifically to OT security?
Yeah, so the OT security, so there are tools that are focused on that, and they'll go out and help you identify inventorium. And like, one of the best things is just to segment it off your network, so that if they, because the problems with the OT is the older ones, it's like you can't, a lot of them you couldn't even change the password. There's a lot of times there's not even encryption on them, and I know that these are things that they're working on, and maybe the newer ones, actually they're trying to do like a lightweight encryption where you could actually change the password, things like that. And but just segmenting it off your network and making sure that if one of those devices got compromised, that you couldn't, leapfrog from that like into your actual network. And so using one of those tools that will go out, identify, and be able to isolate them, I think that's like the best way to handle the OT devices.
Yeah, isolation indeed. Yeah, and that brings us to the topic of the technical knowledge a CISO needs to have. On the one hand, you're talking to boards and C-level and perhaps even securing budgets. On the other hand, you're talking to IT folks and network and infrastructure folks. On the other hand, you're talking to suppliers. Like, in your opinion, how should a CISO be balanced between technical depth and the business acumen, let's say?
Right. If like for myself, because I came up from the networking ranks and hands-on technical, so that's really where I my thinking and everything. I think that's one of the and the first time that I was a CISO at this startup, they actually got me a vCISO to coach me. And that was one of the, like, because I always tend to like go into the weeds, into the technical. And they're like, yeah, no, that's not going to work for, talking to the executive management. It's like red, green, yellow. You really got to simplify it. And so that's another way that a vCISO can come in and help. But yeah, just understanding, like using analogies of, one of the things I do like to do is keep up, with whatever latest attack, things like that. And just being able to like talk through a scenario. Oh, this is how this, this attack happened. And when people, and explaining it in a less technical manner so anybody could understand it. And I just think that's what happens when you are talking like to the board or to executives, is that because they, may not have that technical background. In fact, a lot of times they won't. Mm-hmm. So just using those analogies.
Yeah. So having the skills to use the analogies and the storytelling like you're doing in the book to capture the audience and drive them to a point is very powerful. On the other hand, on the, let's say, the technology side, I can imagine if you're a CISO for 10, 20 years or longer, now you have to learn OT security. Now you have to learn AI security. You need to understand the concept like a large language model and these things. Like, how far should you go as a CISO with all these new technologies, because they keep rising? What's your advice there?
I mean, one of the things that I love, and this was even when I was in IT and doing networking, is that things are evolving. So you always have new things to learn, which, makes it challenging, interesting. But yeah, for the CISO, I mean, at least at a high level to understand, I mean, you don't have to get down into the nitty gritty necessarily, but just understand like at a high level, okay, these are the like main potential threats, for AI. Versus, I mean, you're not going to actually be like trying to train a LLM or something like that. So you don't have to have that level of knowledge.
Mm-hmm. So it's the conceptual understanding, what's it about, what the dangers are, the risks. Okay.
Yes.
Because I can imagine 10 years ago, at least here in Europe, cloud came up. So now you have to learn cloud security. And at the time, many people said, well, it's just the same as on-site or on-premise. And I said, no, it's different. And you have to understand the nuances why cloud is different than on-premise. Mm-hmm. So it just keeps evolving. So basically, if I understand you correctly, you're also saying as a CISO, dear CISO, keep up to date, understand the concepts and the risks attached with them.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a new standard now coming out, the ISO 27400, if I'm not mistaken, which is OT security. So another one to put on the list.
Okay.
So just keep going.
Yeah.
Now let's dive into. We talked about technology and the importance there. By the way, for the audience, in the book of Debra, she explains per chapter like the levels of your organization, like a basic and a medium and an advanced, and what you can do for each maturity level that you're in, which I really appreciate, which is very practical. But so we talked about the technology. We talked about, let's say, the mindset of a CISO. Let's talk about culture, company, organizational culture. How does that play a role in the security landscape of an organization? And how do you influence it in a good way as a CISO?
Yeah, I would say culture is really important. And I mean, and I talk about this in the book, one company I worked at, like everybody that comes in, they call them a cyber warrior. And, and so everybody had that sense of belonging, and it's important, and, the cybersecurity and everything. And I think if you can do that, then, and there was another class that I took at MIT, and they were talking about the same thing. that if you can come up with a slogan and get your do the training in your company, you could put signs up, different things, and just so everybody has that mindset of, oh, could this next email be one where the and they're not just my company phishing me, it's the actual hackers there. So and where they're talking about it, where they're actually talking about it, and around the water cooler, like, hey, did you see this happen? I mean, once the client or the company is talking about cybersecurity and they're aware, maybe they're, hey, did you get caught, or did you figure out that was a test, or I when I was at Cisco one time, I had convinced like the whole team I was on, this one email was a phishing test, and the manager was like, no, they actually said it's a real because there was some sort of information we had to send back, and I was like, no. But hey, we were talking about it, so that's
yeah, it's raising the awareness indeed with real events.
Yeah.
Like, for example, 2 weeks ago here in Belgium, one of the largest or the second largest telecom operators got hacked, and 850,000 phone numbers and PAC codes were breached. And so I immediately alerted the team, and I said, because that provider is also part of the government, I mean, they have a contract with the government, I said, we have to check if we are in danger. And we created a cyber alert. It was the first time we did it. We created a nice template, just 5 slides, very low level, very low threshold. Like, what happened? Are you impacted? What's, And we sent it out to 1,000 people. And within 24 hours, some of them responded like, thanks for, this is the first time we're hearing about this cyber warning and alert from the news and applied to our organization. And for a whole week, I got questions like, am I impacted or not? And I learned that even though we were not directly impacted, there was no incident, just raising the awareness, taking the news and applying it to the context, people are now more, wow. So that is the way I try to change or impact the culture, with news articles and contextualizing them. Any other tips or advice you have there on that front?
Yeah, I can't think of anything else, but I love that, what you did there. That's great. That's a great takeaway. So
yeah, and I learned it myself. Now I have a template ready. The team knows how to fill in the template, but very easy. Everybody can read and understand it.
Yeah.
And drop by drop. If it happens 4 times a year, they are more aware.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I try to do. Anyway, so let's move into the last topic, or last 2 questions. We talked about the vCISO, like the fractional CISO. How is the market evolving for the CISO role? Do you see like a rising demand in the CISO? Are you seeing it perhaps evolving to a different type of profile? How do you see it going?
I mean, a lot of companies don't realize that they need one. They know it's just, however, they know, okay, one of their customers, asked for them to have SOC 2. And, I think just as, especially the bigger that the company gets and the bigger the clients that they have, then more questions are going to come in. It's not just that you have SOC 2, but they're going to start asking, they're going to have more detailed questionnaires, and they're, the client is going to realize, okay, I need, more help. A lot of times it's just that they get hacked maybe, and they're like, hey, you know what, we really need to look at our cybersecurity, and we need to make sure that we're doing everything that we're supposed to, and building the right roadmap and everything like that. So I just think, especially in the small and medium size, a lot of companies they're not really aware of the vCISO and that they actually do need it, and they might find out the hard way by being hacked.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And also here in Europe, the NIS2 regulation says you need a CISO role. It needs to be officially appointed. And then typically what happens is, like, an organization of 200, 500 people can't afford a full-time one. So they say, but then we go for a fractional one. So okay. I see a rise in demand on this side of the ocean. But I also see lots of burnout. CISO burnout is also a common theme. Any advice you can give there to not have a burnout as a CISO? Because you can get called in the middle of the night to resolve an incident, and 7 times for 7 customers. So how do you, any practices there?
Yeah. So I'm one of those people that work, And then I'm like, okay, I just kind of like, I know, okay, this weekend I just need to like watch movies and chill. Because it was actually kind of funny because I was at Cisco and they had they had us all take this little test. And it was like less than 5 minutes. And then they said, oh, this is your personality type, this is your strengths, whatever. And one of the things in there, it said that my personality is that I will just work, and then, wear myself out basically. And they're like, you need to take time. And so I mean, it really made me be more aware of, okay, I can tell, this weekend I just need to chill and need to take that time. Because yeah, CISOs, I mean, most CISOs are only in the job like 2 to 3 years. And even if everything goes good, it's even better for them just to move on to the next, company. And I mean, one of the things that I don't like is where they're going after the CISO. And I mean, there's been a few cases where the government's actually gone after the CISO. And you don't know, like, did the CEO know what was going on? In some of those instances, it makes me think that most likely the CEO did, but they just, the CISOs basically, that's the one that gets loses their job, takes the burden. But I would hate to see, there was one guy, I think, that had to do some jail time, but the other ones, it didn't get to that point. There was a possibility, and then they didn't actually, which I am glad, because, to the best of their abilities, they're doing their job, and there's politics no matter what. And so I'm sure one of the things that I saw with the SolarWinds is they specifically went after the CISO because they knew there had been presentations he'd done that I guess to certain individuals and through email that where he understood the full gravity and the risks, but he didn't actually put those in the risk register. He didn't actually like track them. They kept it really high level. And wasn't like up to the top executive management, wasn't explaining the real risks, and just given, and I mean, let's face it, everybody wants their bonus. Everybody wants their, if you tie your bonuses all the way up to the CEO to different security KPIs, then you're really taking it seriously. But only a few companies actually do that, because, they might say that security is important, but they're not going to risk their bonus.
yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I feel not so much unburdened now, but with the jail time. But,
oh, I know. Well, and that's another reason why I like the vCISO role, because because when they were going after these CISOs, like the SEC, they were looking at emails, they were looking at, and with the vCISO, it's like removed. I mean, you're given the guidance and everything, but you're not in, to the nitty gritty or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's good, because we shouldn't be afraid that, that we're going to end up in jail when we're trying to help these companies to actually, better their security. A lot of times it's budget related. It's other things outside of the CISO's control. So
exactly. Wow, great. Thank you for those insights indeed. Last question, Debra. What is in your future? Is there a second book coming out or a second edition?
You know what? I have an idea for a product, and it's around my book. So one of the things is I created a roadmap based on my book, because somebody said, "Hey, do you have a roadmap?" So I created this roadmap, and I'll use it, in a spreadsheet with my customers. And what I want to do is build a product. And so that way everyone has, that they can do the roadmap, and then we'll overlay it with like CMMC level 1, level 2. And then, over time we can tie it in to where you can see like, SOC 2 or ISO 27001. But just to make this roadmap and building in the security, like easy to track, have, you've got your risk number that you can tell, and even have it like print out a strategy that these are the slides you can take to and here's your 1 and 2 page report of explaining it. And so, because this is something that's really customized for each company, but I do think that I can make, a product out of it and help these companies and, make it for everyone, basically.
Yeah,
So
really nice. Really nice.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Now, if people would like to reach out to you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, I would say go to my website, info@trustedciso.com. So my website's trustedciso.com, but that's my email, info@trustedciso.com. Yeah, send me an email. Check out my website. Of course, get my book.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Wonderful. We'll also put all the links in the show notes so they can address you. And you're on LinkedIn as well, and you're active there. So
Yes.
So wonderful. Debra, thank you so much for joining this episode and talking about the role of the CISO and all the challenges and opportunities. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much, and perhaps see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching or listening to this episode of the Blue Dragon podcast. I hope you learned new things from Debra about the CISO role and all the challenges. If you liked this episode, please like or subscribe or leave a comment, and go to bluedragonpodcast.com to subscribe to the newsletter where you're going to get an executive summary of all the podcast content. Thank you very much, and see you next time.